Time later, these were the scenes on the ground as spectators took matters into their own hands.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have that problem with the sound system. The sound to that disappeared a little while ago. Ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard the band tonight, has to be abandoned. We would ask you now to please leave the stadium in an orderly manner. Tickets are available on the way out for...
Yes, extraordinary scenes at Waverley last night. While all that was happening, you were flying an Ansett jet across the Nullarbor, weren't you?
Was I?
You probably don't remember, but you were.
Oh.
Ever seen anything like that, Don?
No, Sandy, but I just wonder whether it's just got out of hand a little bit in as much as been highlighted. I mean, those people seem to be having fun out there. It wasn't as if to me, those pictures didn't relay any violence and stuff. They were a little bit vandalistic in the way that they went around knocking down the goal squares and all that, the post, but I wonder whether we're just trying to make too much of it there.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? One thing, Roscoe, we should clarify, and that is that the ambulance and the police have no record of any accident of any vehicle crashing into any form of power station. So maybe someone, Ross, could have jumped the gun in that particular area.
Well, I mean, I can't see, Scotty, how they can be having fun. Sorry, Sandy, but I mean, that's hardly fun. I mean, you're pulling down point posts, destroying public property. That's ridiculous.
Well, I said there was vandalisation. There's vandalisation. I acknowledge that, Ross, but if you look at some of those photos, I acknowledge that point, but they weren't out there being destructive. They're in the middle of the ground, and whether it's being sensationalised.
Well, Scotty, there's going to be grass burn across the whole centre square area. They replaced 2 point posts. One was broken, one was actually carried from the other end. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You're almost condoning what's going on.
Ross, I said about vandalisation, I didn't agree with it. Now, listen to what I said, Ross. But the rest of the guy, out there, they carried the point post around and all that. I don't agree with it, but it didn't look as bad as what you're making out. All
right, gentlemen, well, I'm sure we'll be able to carry this on, Roscoe. Take a deep breath. I know it's been a tough week for you in the coach's box as well. Take a deep... and leave him alone, too. Take a deep breath. We'll be back with more. Fine sunny day here in the West Australian capital for the clash later on this afternoon between Hawthorn and the Dockers. But in the meantime, you've thrown a bit of a spanner in the works, haven't you? Well, you've upset a few people. Roscoe disagrees.
Well, he's easy to upset anyway.
All right, well, let's get another viewpoint now, because Andrew Marr, who is a journalist with Inside Football and well respected in football circles. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Andy.
Do you agree or disagree with what Don Scott said?
Oh, no, I disagree wholeheartedly. I've actually left Inside Footy and working for Optus now on the Sports AFL channel, and we had a crew out there last night. And when the lights went out, I came down from the stand and we just wanted to get some pictures out on the ground and get amongst the players. And we were doing that okay. And then the players came off the ground. We went underneath, followed the players up to their rooms. found out what was going on down there, went back out onto the ground just as the crowd invaded the oval. And what started out as a bit of a giggle and, 15 and 16-year-old kids making the most of their opportunity to jump onto the venue,
right.
20 or 30 minutes later was one punch away from being an incredibly volatile situation. And just in terms of Don Scott saying that it wasn't destructive, I mean, it was highly destructive. There were fires breaking out all over the ground.
Andrew, you didn't listen as well. What I said is I don't agree with the vandalism at all, but I also believe that you're sensationalising by saying there's one punch away and all the rest of it.
Well,
now, those people there are being stupid. They've lit a fire in the centre of the ground. You can see vision. They're running through it.
There's no doubt about that, but there have been incidents like this the world over in the last 20 years where stupidity has led to out-and-out pandemonium, which has led to death. And I don't think that you can possibly overstate the potential for disasters to occur in a situation like we had there last night.
And Andrew and Scotty, what you've got to be aware too, there were policemen on the ground, but they were too afraid to go into that area because there were so many people and so many problems that could have erupted. They stood right back. They were so concerned for their own safety.
Well, we saw two brave
management.
Roscoe, we see two brave policemen walk here, and the crowd disperses when they walk over to the goalpost.
Yeah, but that's a much smaller crowd, Scotty, than what the 2,000 that were in the middle of the ground.
Okay, Roscoe, and listen, our game has not got to the stage where what is like in Europe, and I think you are really degrading the spectators that were even out there, because we are not in a situation of what happens in Europe, and if you keep saying those things, well, you're going to bring the bad element to the fore.
But Don, I just think we need to make sure that we don't let it get to that stage, and if we can nip it in the bud.
Well, what are you going to do, Andrew?
Well, let's highlight situations like we had at Waverley last night, and the governing bodies need to be alerted to the potential for absolute disaster there,
so what
and put provisions in place so to ensure that a really serious outbreak doesn't occur.
Okay, so what are you going to do? Put a fence right around Waverley?
No,
or any night venue?
No, but I think there are elements of crisis management the world over that need to be investigated by the AFL, particularly at Waverley Park. I think that last night was a serious example of poor ground management. And I cast your mind back.
Listen, you're talking in generalities. Be specific.
Well, I was in the middle of the crowd last night of probably 5,000 to 10,000 seething, sort of angry people. There were fires all over Waverley. There was fires in the stand. Goalposts were being ripped down. Masses of people were running around in groups saying, what can we go and destroy next? I heard this. I was out in the middle of the whole thing last night. Now, I can't be more specific than that.
Andrew, are we talking
Don,
about 14,
would you condone your kids being involved in that?
Sorry?
Scott, if your kids were out in the ground, would you condone them? What would you do if they were out in the middle of the ground? What would your reaction be if they were out there having fun?
Depending on what they were doing, Roscoe.
But it's pretty easy for a 14 or 15-year-old kid to run out on the ground and have fun, which I do agree happened at the start of it. But then you do get the bad element that get out there and try and make the most of the situation. And there was as I keep saying, the potential for disaster. Being out in the middle of it, you felt very, very close to an outbreak of some serious disaster.
I think the more, Andrew, I don't agree with you or Ross, the more this is highlighted, the more you bring the bad element in. The games in Europe now are not receiving the same publicity or scrutiny as far as this mug element is concerned, and consequently it is not being highlighted. It is not there. It may be there, but it's now under control. This does not happen in Australia, and if you highlight it, it will.
Right, just before you go any further, all four of you, let's just... well, three, isn't it? You've thrown me now. Let's go back to last night when the AFL announcement was made.
I just spoke to Graham, the power station is located on Waverley, and that's like everything out from the Cranbourne dogs right through, so it's just a matter of waiting.
No time on it,
No, they're obviously working on it pretty quickly. They're in contact with
They're in contact with Ross or Colin? He's up here now. In where? Upstairs.
So everything done in the shadows there last night and in darkness. There's 3, 4, 10 of them. I don't know how many people there are here. One other point I think we should clarify, Andrew and Ross. You mentioned there were a lot of these young people running onto the ground. Were there people on the ground that have been drinking? Were there people inebriated? What sort of a crowd are we talking about? You said it was scary.
Well, as I was going to the ground, Sandy, at 6 o'clock there were people walking to the ground drinking bottles of beer and obviously, you know, trying to have a good time, but then you allow that to escalate during the course of the game where they have access to alcohol. Yeah. They get on the ground in that situation. I mean, they're out of control. What it will do, I would hope, is that it would allow now a precedent to be set where this won't happen again.
I agree. There were lots of drunk people out on the ground last night. There's no doubt about that.
All right, gentlemen. Well, as time ticks away, Danny Corcoran, who of course is involved with the Essendon Football Club, then had to ponder what would happen to the players if they had to go back out onto the ground, if they were going to warm down. What would happen to them?
I think if we keep going much longer now, they'll be too cold to even restart. We wouldn't be able to warm up again. No one's been in this situation before. It's quite an extraordinary situation, so it's all new to them, and they're all trying to keep warm and focus. You know, they're stretching and being rubbed, and probably not aware totally what's going on. But I think we'll just have to wait and see. But time's very, very short now.
Yes, well, of course, the game was abandoned. Andrew, we heard and spoke with Ross earlier about what he thought may happen as an outcome. Ross, you still suggesting that the game should be replayed?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think that that's way out of the question. Gary Colling made that point last night,
yeah.
and I don't think that there's any way that can happen. There were a whole lot of theories floating around last night. The one that I seem to come back to that I don't think has been mentioned is that in cricket we have artificial rules governing the intervention of weather. Now, this wasn't weather, and it wasn't actually a natural disaster of any way, shape or form, but it was something that halted the game. Now, if we look at a one-day game of cricket and weather cuts it, there's a run rate that decides the outcome of the match, and points are awarded, not necessarily equal, once the game's gone far enough. Now, 20 minutes into the third quarter, I know St.Kilda probably won't be happy if this outcome is realised, but I mean, both sides have had their chance to establish a superiority on the match, and Essendon certainly had maintained control for most of the night, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if Essendon was awarded the 4 points.
Well, what about a match ratio system, maybe?
Yeah, that could work, although it's not part of the existing ladder, so we'd need to go right back to the start of the season and incorporate that for every game. And I think that the match ratio system wasn't thoroughly endorsed by the clubs when it was used last time, so I think that unless we're going to stick with the match ratio from here on in for the rest of the season and seasons to come, I think it's best that we just create a rule right now, use this as a precedent and use it from now on. I know that Ross said after the game that it's likely that it's only happened once before and it probably won't happen again, but who's to say that it won't happen again?
Yeah, sure. Andrew, you were in the thick of things there at Waverley Park all last night. Ross Oakley, you confronted him and asked him maybe what effect this would have on the proposals of a night grand final.
If you draw that long bow, you'd say we shouldn't have any night football ever again. Of course, that's stupid. You wouldn't consider that. I don't think it has any impact at all on a night grand final. It's the first time since we've had lights here that anything like this has occurred, and you know, it'll be a long while, I dare say, before it happens again.
Poor old Ross, he was probably looking for just a nice, quiet, long weekend going to the footy, and all this has unfolded. Ross will be making the announcement on the outcome of this drama a little bit later on, and we'll be bringing the Executive Officer of the AFL. I suppose long weekend, you would have been looking forward to the open neck shirt. Nice quiet weekend, Roscoe?
Well, I've got the open neck shirt, Sandy, but it hasn't been a quiet weekend.
Well, I know the Commission's been meeting right across the country. What has happened this morning? Just take us through proceedings.
Well, yes, we did meet here at AFL headquarters, and some of the commissioners, of course, couldn't be with us. But we went through the various options that there were before us. Basically, they boiled down to two options, Sandy. The first was to declare a result from the game last night. Now, that could have been any one of a number of options. One was, of course, to declare Essendon the winner, but that would have been pretty unfair to St Kilda. To declare it a draw, again, probably unfair to one or other of the two sides. We could have given both sides 4 points. We think that would have been unfair to those sides that would be competing against Essendon and St Kilda for a final 8th place. So we decided that declaring a result wasn't the way to go. So it then boiled down to what were the options in terms of continuing to play or replay the game. We looked at replaying the whole game, and clearly there are some problems with doing that. We would need to provide a weekend off to do that. That would push the whole season back and make the grand final a grand final in October again.
Right.
And all the disruption that that causes was unacceptable to us. So we boiled down to the key option being let's continue the game and replay the balance of the match. Or play out the balance of the match, and we've decided to do that in consultation with the two clubs and the AFL Players Association next Tuesday night at Waverley.
So that's this coming Tuesday night at Waverley?
Yes, that's right.
I mean, St Kilda have got commitments for just a few days later, though, haven't they?
we've shifted the St Kilda game that was shifted from Saturday to Friday night back to Saturday again, so that they've got that extra day.
Ross, just on that now, you say you're going to pick up the game virtually from where you left off on the other night. Does it mean that if there's been an injured player, can that player be in contention to come into this lineup? What's the ruling there?
Yes, because there's likely to be some players, a number of players that would be unavailable on Tuesday night, we've allowed the clubs to have a full list of players available, Sandy. We've again run that past both the clubs, and they're both quite in agreement with that solution.
Now, I just want to clarify this. It will be played at Waverley on Tuesday night.
At 7:30 p.m.
At 7:30. And are we talking about the remainder of the game, or are we talking about an entire game?
No, we're talking about the 24-odd minutes that were not played the other night, last night. So what we will do, Sandy, is we'll play 24 minutes plus time on. We'll divide it into two halves, so they'll play two halves. There'll be a break in the middle of the game that coaches will be able to talk to their players. We've broken it into two halves because there may be inclement weather on Tuesday night, and it would be unfair to let one club have the advantage or the disadvantage of that inclement weather. And the gates will be thrown open. People will be able to watch the rest of the game quite free of charge, and we've offered the game to Channel 7.
Okay, Ross, well, we thank you for that. I'm just wondering who it was in the past, Roscoe, who said, funny old game, football, isn't it?
It sure is. It never ceases to amaze me, Sandy.
All right, thank you, Ross, for that news. We appreciate you giving up your time on this Sunday. Go and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, Sandy.
Ross Oakley, the Chief Executive Officer of the AFL. So there it is. The game will be continued at Waverley Park on Tuesday night to decide which one team will take the 4 points, or, of course, if they draw, it's 2 each. We'll take a break.